Let's go to the screen sharing. I'll do that. That's a delay.
Okay, I see we're ready to begin. So if I may, welcome to the City of Westminster's first community workshop on redistricting. Thank you for being with us today via Zoom and in person. I appreciate everyone's attendance and participation. This is our first of a few community workshops. And at this time, the presentation will be conducted by Dr. Justin Levitt, the Vice President for National Demographics Corporation. So with no further ado, I'd like to hand it over to him. We will review different things and then we'll have an opportunity for questions and further discussion and stories related to community of interest groups and special areas, and we look forward to the presentation. So with no further ado, Dr. Levitt, I turn it over to you.
Okay, well, all right. Good morning. Thank you all for coming to our first community workshop. Thank you as we've worked out some of these technical issues, but thank you all for coming today. My name is Dr. Justin Levitt with National Demographics, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning to basically introduce and walk you through the process, the tools, and hopefully get the conversation started about the new district elections that we're going to be.
Your screen.
Correct.
No, it's the other screen. You have to do share screen.
I have to start the presentation first.
You go to Zoom. Share screen. Okay.
So why redistricting and why now? Because for those of you who may remember, just 2 years ago, the city went through the initial process of switching from at-large elections to district elections. Well, Westminster, well, although that process literally only ended at the beginning of 2020, it's required that once the decennial census data is released every 10 years following the US Census, we are required to look at the current district boundaries and adjust them if necessary to comply with federal and state law. And some of those federal and state requirements change so that the requirements that we used even just a couple of years ago are not actually the same laws that apply to us today. And so some of our conversation today is going to look at some of those new laws like the Fair Maps Act and look at how they apply to the city of Westminster. Now, in addition to looking at our revisiting the map that the city adopted a couple of years ago, there's also a little bit of a wrinkle in this plan, in our process as well. The city council approved placing a referendum on the June ballot to adopt a a citywide, or instead of having a citywide elected mayor, replacing it with with a system where all 5 council members would be elected from a district. In order to make sure that we have a map in place for that scenario in November, the city must simultaneously look at redrawing the 4 districts, the redistricting of the 4-district map, as well as developing and selecting a 5-district map so that that map will already be in place if the ballot measure passes. Essentially, our normal deadline, as we'll see on the next slide, would be April 17th. We would not be able to adopt a new map in between the passage and verification of that July or of that June referendum and the November election. So in essence, we have to do 2 processes now. We have to do a redistricting for our 4-district map to comply with requirements after the 2020 census. We also have to develop a new 5-district map that would take effect if the ballot measure passes in June. And we're doing this under a quite compressed time frame. Normally, we would receive census data in March of the year following the census. However, the census did not release its preliminary numbers until 2/3 of the way through August. And it didn't release its final, and then California had to do a revision where it readjusted for prisoner populations. That data set came out on September 21st, and actually a revision of that data set came out September 27th. And so really the process did not get underway for most cities around the state until the fall, because that was when we had access to the new numbers and the new data available. Again, with that additional wrinkle that here in the city of Westminster, we had an additional challenge because the ballot measure that would create 5 districts was placed on the ballot in November. And so we're looking at a very compressed time frame compared to what we would normally experience. And it's also compressed on the other end as well. Normally, we would have until April 17th in order to adopt the final map. However, in Westminster's case, the county is requiring that the city adopt that 5-district map by March 1st in order to have it on the ballot in June as part of, in the case that it does pass, and so those districts would be able to take effect for November. And so part of our delays of getting all of these workshops scheduled and underway has been these changing deadlines from the county registrar's office and dealing with the pandemic. And I'll be honest, as a personal note, last week I was out with COVID as well. Not last week, but the week before. So getting some of these scheduled has been a bit of a challenge. But we are working here over the next 2 months to really get as much of the process kind of compressed, but hopefully that allow us all to stay on top of it and keep it front of mind as we work through the next 6 weeks. This is the first of 4 workshops. We also have additional workshops on Monday, January 24th, Thursday, January 27th, and Monday, January 31st. We have tried to schedule different times and locations throughout the city. So our Monday workshop on the 24th is at 6 p.m. On Thursday, we have a noon workshop. And on Monday, January 31st, we have a late night workshop at 7 p.m. So for those of you who have to commute, it's a great time to potentially come out a little bit later. The idea is to really try to get as many people to show up at different times and places as we can. This gives us 4 workshops, and what the purpose of these workshops is going to be is we're going to go through all of the different mapping tools. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can about the rules, the process, the criteria, and serve as an education and opportunity for you to share your input on the draft, on the factors that should go into those maps. We're doing all this so that on February 1st, by the end of the day, we have our first deadline for map submission. This is to give us enough time to get all the maps processed and placed in the website and made available to the community for review for the February 9th hearing. On February 9th, we'll have the first opportunity to review both 4 and 5 district maps. And then we'll have another turnaround with revisions to the draft maps, another opportunity for people to submit maps prior to the February 23rd hearing. And again, this is all in anticipation that we need to have that 5 district map in place by March 1st so that it can be part of that ballot measure and therefore can be used if the measure passes to switch to a 5 district option in November, in July, or sorry, in June. That will be in place for November. We do have a little bit more time for the 4 district map. And so even if on February 23rd, the city does not approve a new 4 district map, we could take until April 17th if necessary to do that. Let's see, we have a question about the process.
I'm not sure if I'll be heard unless I'm close to recording the
Why don't you
audience.
just say it and I can repeat it if it's,
So
if
I
you need
have
to.
3 questions about the slide that is up right now.
Okay.
The first question is, prior to coming today, the deadline for the map submission was posted on the city's website as being February 1st. On this slide, it says February 9th. Deadline for map submission for the February 19th. So is the deadline to submit the maps not showing on here? Is that, can you confirm that's February 1st?
If you see it right underneath the deadline for map submission for 2/9, and then the next line is February 1st, 2022. And we do have physical copies of the presentation on the table if you would like to grab one to follow along.
Is February 1st on this slide?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm missing one. I'm so sorry. Oh, over on the left. Okay, so, all right, got it.
This is for the February 9th.
Okay. And then my other question is, 3 of the 4 workshops are scheduled just within 7 days of that deadline. 1 is only a few hours, literally 24 hours before the deadline. There's no way that we're so late in the process, it's not giving the public enough time to learn the tools and participate, which is a requirement. I know the workshops are not required, but I'm concerned that today's hearing or today's workshop was not noticed until last night. And again, you've got 3/4 of the workshop scheduled within a week of the deadline. So is there any way those can be pushed up or not?
You know, I wish we did have more time to do this. Unfortunately, between the holiday season, which we had a lot of dates that were not available either on staff end or city's end, as well as next week being Martin Luther King Day on Monday, and other events going on in the city next week, including I believe a council meeting next week. These were the dates that we could find available in January to hold these meetings where we all had availability. I do apologize. We were originally scheduling another meeting earlier this week because I was out with COVID. The city decided not to move the meeting online, but rather to postpone it until we could do it in person after the quarantine period.
One last question on this. I went through all the code for the Fair Maps Act and everything. And also on ballot measures. I did not see a legal requirement to submit to the voters part of the ballot measure of the 5 district map, because we in our general law city do not vote for maps. We vote for the measure. But I'm just curious if
So the
perhaps-
challenge is that if we do not have a map prior to April 17th, then the November election cannot be held using a map.
I get that.
And so-
I'm asking about the March 1st deadline for the 5
Right.
districts.
That deadline is, and that's what I'm getting to. That deadline is coming from the registrar's office. They're telling us that they will not be able to implement a 5 district map for the November election should the ballot measure pass, unless it is provided to them for the measure. That's what the registrar's office is telling us, is what the city needs to do in order to have that available, or in order to be able to use it. If not, the November election would have to be held at large, which could pose additional liability under the California Voting Rights Act for the city. And we just went through the process a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago now, of switching from at-large to district elections.
So it's the registrar of voters that's putting that mandate in place.
Yes.
Thank you.
And so we want, originally we would have had a little bit more time between the workshops and those hearings to discuss the maps, which we were originally thinking we could have in March, until we had that change from the registrar, which pushed our timeline up to make sure that we have that 5-district map in place before as the registrar is requiring it. And of course, I wish we had an additional 6 months. Had we gotten the census data in March as we normally would, then we would have an additional 6 months between March and September to start scheduling and discussing the process before we got into the fall, or spring even. Now, when it comes to our criteria, as I mentioned earlier, we have this new law called the Fair Maps Act that talks about the criteria that cities have to use when drawing districts, going through the redistricting process. And the Fair Maps Act divides basically the criteria into different groups. The first grouping of criteria is federal requirements. These are what the Supreme Court and other federal courts have required of all jurisdictions that use districts. And the first is equal population. This is the principle of one person, one vote. Each district has to be more or less the same, have the same number of total residents. While it doesn't have to be perfectly equal down to one person, congressional districts do, but city council districts don't, we do have to get more or less close to that number. They allow a maximum deviation or difference between the largest and smallest districts of 10%. And so that's 10% of an ideal district population. This also uses that 2020 census count. So it includes everyone. It includes children, it includes non-citizens. Everyone counted as part of the 2020 census. The state adjusted numbers is what counts toward equal population. We also have to follow the Federal Voting Rights Act. While race cannot be the only factor or even the predominant factor in the creation of a district, we do have to concern ourselves with protected class communities, groups that have historically faced discrimination or barriers to registration and voting, or obtaining material in their language. We have to consider whether or not we have communities, neighborhoods, or other sorts of factors that create communities of protected class groups. And we have to make sure that we're not either diluting their ability to vote by packing them into districts so that they have less influence than they otherwise would, or by cracking them across different districts to minimize their influence that way. In fact, what the federal requirements and the Voting Rights Act require is that we look at this protected class community in the lens of our other criteria, particularly these in the central column. The central column is where the new Fair Maps Act really gives us a rank-ordered list of criteria we have to prioritize. And the first criterion is contiguity. Contiguity is the principle that all parts of a district must touch each other. You can't have a little bit of a district on the west end of the city and a little bit on the east end that don't actually connect to each other. As one decision puts it, you must be able to walk or drive from one part of the district to any other part of the district without leaving the district. Also, the new law defines that areas that only touch at a single point are not contiguous. You have to actually have a physical connection between all parts of the district. Second, we have neighborhoods and communities of interest. I'm going to go through communities of interest in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides. So for now, let's just think of communities of interest as areas that have some sort of geographic or economic, socioeconomic similarity that need to be kept together because they're a neighborhood or otherwise have some sort of community identity. We're going to come back to this one. Third, easily identifiable boundaries is the principle that it should be easy for voters to understand which district they live in. So to the extent we can follow major roads or other natural or man-made features, maybe jurisdictional subdivisions like the way school districts might bisect a city, or even just what you as a community define as your neighborhoods and community boundaries. We should strive to follow that rather than just random lines on a map. And fourth, compactness, which the law specifically defines as not bypassing one group of people to get to a more distant group of people, aimed at hooks and fingers. And of course, really really the shape of the district matters. Does it look like a regular polygon? Does it look like a regular area? Or does it look odd? And oddness in and of itself is not a reason to bypass a map. These are rank ordered for a reason. So if, for example, a community is not the most compact because it follows a canyon, it follows a particular street or road, we have to keep that community together first before we worry about compactness. So these are rank ordered in this order. In addition, the Fair Maps Act prohibits favoring or discriminating against a political party. Consideration of partisanship is not part of the Fair Maps Act criteria and cannot be considered by council as part of the process. Finally, other traditional districting principles, that third column on the right, these are the optional criteria. In fact, we may not consider any of them at all if we don't want to. These are factors that courts over the decades have recognized as being potentially valid considerations in redistricting, but they're not required. So they only come last, and they only come after we've looked at federal and state requirements. For example, minimizing voter shifted between different election years is the principle that if you have voters that last cast a ballot for council in 2018, moving them to a district where the next election takes place in 2024 would mean that they would go 6 years between electing a council member, while other voters could potentially move up and have 2 years between votes for a council member. Future population growth, if we know that an area of the city is likely to have massive new development, then we can underpopulate that within the 10% limits to take that into consideration. Although I will warn you, with future population growth, what we're seeing across Orange County is that a lot of that infill development, which is just a small unit here or a small project there, is actually leading to more growth than some of the big new developments especially in areas like Westminster that are mostly built out. And respecting the voters' choices is the principle that the voters of the city have elected a council, and you might consider whether or not voters should be the ones to decide whether or not those members continue, rather than removing someone from office based on the stroke of a pen on the map. Again, all of these other traditional principles are optional to the degree you want to consider them. They come last after federal and state criteria. Let me just define neighborhoods and communities of interest, and then I'll take a couple questions about the criteria. So neighborhoods are physically defined. They are like our Lego building blocks that make up the city. It could be as small as a single condominium complex or subdivision, a tract of homes that was all built at the same time in the same place by the same builder. They could be defined as historical districts or as sites touching a particular, or areas touching a particular site of importance to the community, like a school or a park or a landmark. They could be defined by the areas adjacent to a particular freeway or canal, a road, or a particular natural feature. In addition, we could think of neighborhoods as kind of, we could think of neighborhoods as being the smallest units. They're very hard to break up because they are so small. Now, neighborhoods fit together into communities. So we think of neighborhoods as those Lego building blocks. The community is what they build into. And oftentimes with communities of interest, we're talking about areas that have shared issues, characteristics, socioeconomic or demographic factors, or simply have a community identity in some way. And we may disagree between different members of the community on where those communities of interest are. Some of them will be well-defined, but others might have a little bit of a fuzzier edge to them. For example, adjacent to us, the city of Anaheim has a community called Little Arabia. Everybody agrees on the core of Little Arabia. It's along Brookhurst. But how far east and west, how far north and south, different community members give different extents. How far does that Little Arabia business corridor extend? And this is the difference between neighborhoods and communities. The businesses directly along Brookhurst, that's the neighborhood. The areas that are impacted by it, where Arab Americans or immigrants are living, those are a little bit fuzzier. That's the fuzzier boundary. And so when we talk about communities of interest, we may slightly disagree on some of the boundaries of communities of interest, but we want to hear as much as possible what those geographic extents are, what areas need to stay together. And we're not just talking about, oh, well, I identify as a member of District 1 and my District 1 is my community. Now, districts are not communities. Communities are the neighborhoods and other sorts of extents of areas of shared issues, shared concerns, shared problems that make up or eventually come to make up that district. And particularly for the Fair Maps Act, we have to think about areas that benefit from being included in a single district for the purpose of their effective and fair representation. There may be communities of interest that are too large to fit in a single district. There may be communities of interest that are right on the border crossing a major road that have a different need on one side of that road than the other. For example, I was just working with downtown Fullerton the other day. Part of downtown Fullerton is very heavily Latino. Another part of downtown Fullerton is very heavily white. And everyone identifies downtown as a community of interest, but the extent to which both parts of that community benefit from being kept together or benefit from having two different areas divided at a very clear line like Commonwealth or the railroad tracks, that's part of the discussion we want to have, we need to have as part of this process. And so before I go on to the numbers, I do have a question in the audience about criteria.
So a couple of questions, especially when we get into the 5 districts, because we have 10 square miles to work with. The contiguous requirement around the 4 carve-outs for Midway City unincorporated area, and at my preliminary attempt, I found that to break it up in 5 and have them be compact and all the other criteria. Is there an exception for, number 1, I believe the city is going to attempt to annex that. I don't know when, or at least 3 of the 4, maybe all 4 of the islands. But is there an exception recognized by the courts that if you have so many, these 4 islands, that maybe it may be almost impossible to be contiguous? In the 4 district map, I didn't run into it. When I ran into it is the 5.
Okay.
Everything is more.
So it's a great question. How does contiguity work when you have huge county islands or other features in your map that maybe make it so that physically touching isn't always the easiest or best way to connect areas? And this is one of the, I hate to sort of defer, but part of the issue is the Fair Maps Act is a new law. And we don't know exactly how the courts will interpret it. Under pre-Fair Maps Act law, as long as there was some sort of geographic connection maybe across that county island, for example, or maybe a road that connects that little chunk, we know that it would be considered contiguous. Under the Fair Maps Act, however, the plain text of the law is that the areas must be connected along axes that physically touch each other. And because of that rank order, it is the first criteria after the Voting Rights Act and equal population. So this has come up. There is a city in Northern California where the areas east of the freeway look very different from the areas west of the freeway, except that there's this old railroad track that the city doesn't control. It's like not in the city, technically in the city limits, that crosses that railroad track. Well, according to and the city there really hates this because they've contacted, I think, 4 or 5 different attorneys who have all agreed that any district that crosses the railroad track without actually having a physical bridge would be in violation of the Fair Maps Act. Even though at points this railroad track is literally only, 10 feet across. So our best understanding of the Fair Maps Act as it is currently written is that anything that would touch only at a point or would need to cross a county island would not be contiguous. You actually have to physically be able to walk or drive.
Well,
Now,
we
I
can
would
walk
say-
and drive in Midway City. It is
You can't-
the main streets.
You can't cross a county island until that area is actually annexed. And this has come up repeatedly in many places because a lot of California cities have weird boundaries. And the people who wrote the Fair Maps Act were thinking of big cities like Los Angeles, or actually Sacramento was their main case, where they crisscrossed the county islands in Sacramento 10 years ago when drawing districts. And that was actually their main inspiration for writing it the way that they did. Or Placentia, that actually passed a map where they crossed the city of Fullerton to connect one of their districts. And so I hear your concern, and believe me, this is something that I'm hearing across the state. And I hope the legislature will clarify or adjust the law in the next 10 years. But the plain text and the way that the attorneys that we've worked with across the state are interpreting the plain text of the law as written, you must have a physical connection. And if it's crossing a county island, it doesn't count.
So at the time, if the city annexed, we have 4 separate islands, I think. They're all clustered, similar area, but there's little breaks. It's very confusing. But if we annex all 4, we'll have to do the formal process. If we annex the smaller ones, we won't. But at any point, at that time, once we annex that, is there a population limit that tells us we must redistrict at that point to draw new maps because we've taken on additional land?
If the annexed area would constitute more than 25% of the population of the city, then you would have an opportunity to redraw.
So otherwise, how do you assign those
in the annexation order, the formal annexation, part of what is done is assigned that area to a district or more than one district. And in fact, that certainly has happened. Where
who does that? Who determines that? The city council or?
I will defer to the city attorney or the planning office who have gone through this before. I believe it is in it's part of the LAFCO report. That has to, the local area formation committee that has to approve or study the annexations before that they would be finally approved. But it would be certainly part of the formal ordinance that annexes that area to the city.
But I think there's criteria in the code of that says it must be annexed into the district most.
It has to be there physically next to it. There are cases where there's an area such that there's a road that would divide it, that you could say like north of that street would go to their District 3 and south would go to District 4 along that major road.
So what I'm
But
saying,
that
is
would
if
be in
we
the
had
order.
districts that kind of split in half over those annexation parts, then conceivably, maybe a couple of the islands would go to one and a couple of islands would go to the other, depending on which district they are closest and connected to, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the actual districts, of course, and if there's like, for example, right now, the large Midway City Island is completely surrounded by District 3. So if that were, and I'm just using this as an example, if that were annexed today, that would have to go to District 3.
And even if it causes the population deviation to exceed the 10%.
Even if, it's no different than if a community builds a 5,000 new units in a particular district. And so when we look at the new numbers 10 years later, now the populations are completely out of balance.
So it does not force a redrawing just based on the population.
Yeah, only if the census population as of the last census would throw your plan, would constitute at least 25% of the city's population.
Okay, and I can't remember my other question on that slide, but.
Well, we'll have more chance for
Okay,
questions later.
thank you.
Let me go on to say, we do have to redraw the current districts under any case, because right now our district map is just over that 10%, 10.06. And so this necessitates us redrawing the council districts in any case. And as we see, it's driven by District 1, which is 6%, 6.25% overpopulated. Now, using these, using the 2020 census count, we did calculate that in the 4 district maps, each of the 4 districts would need to contain 22,771 residents. And in a 5 district scenario, each would need to contain 18,217 residents. That's just the total population of 91,083 divided by either 4 or 5. Looking at the Voting Rights Act analysis, what we see here, and we'll look at over the next couple slides, is that we have 2 districts with an Asian American majority. Both districts 3 and 4 have a citizen voting age or eligible voter population that is about 65% Asian American. And District 2, which has our highest Latino population at about 30%, also is about 50% Asian American as well. If we look at those demographics across the city, we see that the highest concentration of Latino residents of the city is in and around the central portions of the city, around Sigler Park in particular. And the way you read these kind of maps is that the areas in blue are under 35% Latino, less than a third Latino. The areas in orange and yellow, we're getting into about 50%. And then areas in pink are over 75% Latino. As you see, there are not a whole lot of areas that are majority Latino in the city. But if we look at Asian Americans, we do see that particularly in the eastern sections of the city, perhaps not just in the district of Little Saigon, but also throughout the eastern areas of the city, we see large areas that are over 65, over 75% Asian American. Now, we don't break out Vietnamese and other Asian demographics in our citizen voting age population data. And that follows advice from the Supreme Court and other federal courts for the purposes of the Voting Rights Act. We look at the Asian American communities together because historically, there were not necessarily special rules for particular groups, but a lot of them were included under the same laws, discriminatory laws in the past. Now, I do want to do just a brief overview of the different mapping tools to show you how they all work. And I really want to emphasize that we want to hear from you regardless of how you want to submit. You don't have to draw a map. We would love to hear your comments in writing. If you show up at a public hearing or one of these community forums and want to verbally give your testimony, we want to hear from you however you want to come to us. And in fact, if you don't want to, if English is not your native language and you want to provide your comments in Spanish or Vietnamese or Chinese or Korean, we'll take your comments in any language and make sure that we get them not only translated, but make sure that they're publicly available for everybody to see. However, if you do want to submit your own map, we do have a number of tools to help you do that. The most basic version, and we have some of these here in person, and I'll show you on the website where to go to get this in a second, is our basic map drawing tool. It's just a simple paper map showing the city with the total population counts. And so all you have to do is get out the calculator app on your phone and start adding population together until you get that ideal number. We've put the population, those 18,000, 22,000, we've put those numbers right on the PDF, right on the paper, so that you can just start adding things together until you get close to it. And if we haven't drawn a boundary where you think there should be one, just draw it in. Let us know where you think it will be, and we'll try to draw it in as best as we can. This is great for those who don't have internet access or simply prefer something visual right in front of them. We also have a version of this that has an Excel supplement, so that instead of doing it by yourself or using your phone, I don't trust my fingers to get all the digits right, we have an Excel version that will automatically calculate this up for you. We also have two browser-based tools that I'm going to highlight in a little bit more detail for those of you who are planning on using one of our internet mapping tools. And these are Dave's Redistricting app, DRA, and the Maptitude Online Redistricting. And so let me start here by taking you onto the website. Any controls? In the slideshow. And I'm just going to share here our website. On the city's redistricting website, let me just go right up to the top. We have links to all of our draw your own mapping tools. So right below the public hearing schedule, and we'll have our proposed district maps. Below that, we have how to create your own mapping tools. We have our paper kits down here at the bottom for those of you who want the paper only maps or the Microsoft Excel supplement, as well as links to Dave's Redistricting and the Maptitude Online Redistricting. Dave's Redistricting allows you to either start with a blank map or with the current council districts. Let's just start with a blank map for the purposes of our discussion here. It's going to redirect you to the app. Now, the first thing you got to do with both Dave's Redistricting and Maptitude for Redistricting is create an account. Creating an account on both of them is pretty easy. Here I've already created an account just so we'd be able to get moving quickly on it. Got it. You'll see a list when you create an account that's empty to start with. But when you click on the link to start with the blank map, you'll be able to copy this map and start drawing your own proposal. When you first get the map, it'll be in this view only mode. So what you need to do is hit this paintbrush next door. Yeah, there we go. It'll take a second to load all of the data. It actually has to load all of California first and then kind of zoom down to Westminster. Click this paintbrush and hit yes to make an editable new version of this. And you can either start with the current districts or blank maps of either 4 or 5 districts. Give it a second to load and it will appear on your list of my maps. Then we just double click to go into this nice little mapping tool. The first thing we might want to do, we just click on the title here to change it. And we see a description here for where you can describe what you're trying to achieve. And if you don't feel ready to do it at the start, you can always come back by double clicking the title to get back into that. To draw in Dave's redistricting, the default it's going to give you is by precinct. That's because, they don't want to overwhelm you with that block level data at first. You can select blocks if you want to start with the smallest census geography. But if you're going to select a whole area and you know that whole area is going to be in one of these districts, precincts are a good way to start. But let me show you how that all works. In fact, what I'm going to do first of all is turn on our background map, because that'll show us all of the streets. I'm also going to label the precincts with the total population, because then we'll see some numbers come in. It'll help us get up to that 22,000 or 18,000 number. To edit a district, we start by selecting the district we want to edit. We just go into one, or you can go to two, we'll start with one. And then we go back to the paintbrush, and then we click. And you can click and drag and move those areas that you want to add to that first district into it. If you want to zoom in, you can zoom in a little bit. And let's say we want to add block by block. I want to use the freeway here to distinguish these two districts. So I'm going to go into block just by selecting block and then hit the precinct, and it suddenly divides the precinct into all of the different census blocks. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so we can see some of that detail. And now, just as I did before, we'll hit the paintbrush and start painting and get the areas just south of the freeway. When I'm finished with this district, or if I want to move on, I can simply click another precinct, and it will divide that up into census blocks as well. Or if I'm ready to move to a higher or bigger unit of geography, I can just click precinct, and it'll take me back to being able to select the whole precinct. If I mess up, I can hit erase, which is this little eraser symbol. And again, I can just click to unassign that. As we go, we can see that the population numbers for our district are provided here in the district details. Or as we roll over, we can see precinct information on the right. When we're done with our map, we just go back to this original mapping window, click the little check mark next to the map, go to share, and copy this URL and send it to the city by email. Once you get that URL, we can go in and get your map. So we can process it and make sure it's publicly available for everyone to see. But we do need the URL. If you just create a map and don't send the URL, you are going to be the only person that can view your map. So make sure to share the URL link with the city when you're ready to go.
And how do you go about doing that? What email address?
Okay, so how do you do that? Well, on the city's redistricting website, we have contact.
just passed it.
Okay. So districts@westminster-ca.gov. This is our email link. Right at the top of the district map process and create your own map section. We also, there is a PowerPoint presentation that walks you step by step through this. We're going to make sure to get this uploaded. I don't see it on here right now, but I will make sure because I know I sent it over. In addition, we have Maptitude Online Redistricting. This is kind of our deep dive. Some of you actually did use this in the process of district elections.
It was not available
Not
for
available?
Westminster,
Okay.
as I shared with you before. We did not have that option.
Well, it is available now, and all you need to do is, again, just create an account. I've created one earlier. When you're using Maptitude Online Redistricting, the first thing you're going to get is this called Plan Manager. The Plan Manager basically is where it's going to keep track of all the drafts that you're working on, and actually your final maps as well. Only you have access to your Plan Manager. So this is your private list of maps. You start by going to New Plan, and it's going to let you start either with the existing districts if you want a 4-district map, or a 5-district blank map. Let's do the 5-district map just to show you a little bit different from our last program. You can give it a name. Hit OK. And it's going to build you a new plan that will appear in your Plan Manager and will open up in here. Now, as you can see here, although we show you the current lines for the council districts, it's actually all unassigned. Nothing has been assigned to a district yet. It comes up with this nice little help window on the right.
That's what confused me. So when I pull it up and I want to do a 5-district, it's already shown me predetermined boundaries of an existing 4-district.
So let me get, so we do have this help window on the right that if you don't miss anything that I say here today, it walks you step by step through the process of creating your own plan, drawing districts, and so forth. You can get to this menu simply by clicking help. Click help again to hide it. We also have quick tips that will also walk you step by step through some of the most important features. And contact. If you are struggling with this, we do have the contact that gives you that link to our email. Email us and we can provide assistance that way as well. Whenever you can also see this drop-down menu to translate the website into Spanish, Portuguese, Vietnamese, Korean, or Chinese as well. So to draw maps in Maptitude for redistricting, we start by choosing our target district. That's this little window up here. Is really our drawing toolbar. We're going to draw a new district, and our source is going to be from unassigned. That means that those census blocks haven't been assigned to a district yet, and nothing has been assigned yet. So we can then go here to the bottom, selection by census block. And then we have a couple of options. The little pointer tool lets you pick one census block at a time. Not exactly the easiest way to do it, but it does make sure you get just the block that you're looking to add. If you want to take in a slightly larger area, we also have everything that touches the circle. You can draw a circle with the center point being where you start and just drag your mouse out. Or you can draw a shape. And again, this is going to be anything that touches or within that polygon. So it's not fully contained. This is what always gets me. It's not just what's fully inside. It's anything that touches that line or within will get added to your district. And we can see here at the bottom this pending changes window. I'll move this for a second. We see this pending changes window. This tells us that this gives us our updated population as we go along, the deviation, and all of the demographics that we have in this data set. So everything from our population and our socioeconomic measures to our voting and other information about race and so on. All of it's in this little table here that we can look at if we want as we go along. When we're ready to go, we hit the check mark. It's going to ask you which district you want to put it in. Or, especially when you're creating a new district, it's going to ask you to assign it a number. We hit OK, and it creates our district. We can then continue to add to that district. looking at the pending changes as we go, hitting the check mark to continue to move things into it. Let's say we accidentally hit a part of the map and we say, oops, I did not mean to do that. I did not mean to move this area into it. Well, don't worry, it hasn't moved it yet. It's still pending. So we can hit the little X to clear that selection. Now it's no longer selected, and we can start again moving where we want to move. And let's say we make a mistake. Let's say we move an area into District 1, and oh, I didn't really want to do that. That was a mistake. Well, we can hit this little backwards arrow to undo that most recent change and go back a step to our previous map. Warning, it has to be in the same session. You can't log off your computer and then come back and to hit undo. You have to do it while you're in there. It's kind of going to reset every time you close the window down and start over. But as you go, if you want to see, as you make your districts, they will show up on the districts tab. We're going to see each of the districts appear in here as we create them. So let's say we create a second district. We're going to just create new district. We're going to hit the check mark. We're going to call this District 2. Now we're going to see District 2 appear in our list of districts as we go until we get a required number. If we want to see some of those demographics that we saw earlier, in here in the layers, your display toolbar, we can pick a theme. So let's say we want to look at Asian citizen voting age population. Well, maybe this map looks kind of familiar because we were looking at it earlier. If we wanted to say, look at where we find college graduates, people with a bachelor's degree, we can look at that. Or income, where do we see households earning over 75,000? All of those different demographic measures are going to be here. Where do we
One
have?
at a time can be displayed.
One at a time, because it's not really possible to see 2 or 3 of these overlaid on each other. And we have the percentages in the table here. So anything like this is child at home. So what percentage of households have a child at home? Anything that's in the darkest purple is going to be under 25% of households have a child. The middle blue, 25 to 35%, and so forth.
Is there like on Dave's, that's just the high level stuff where there's analysis, just like a chart, but on the side there, you have a whole list of in this tool, a list of all the, all the way down to income and all that. Is there there's no button to hit to like get an analysis of that data chart?
So in the districts table, you're going to see all of those fields calculated with the percentages.
That's just the high level. Where's all the income and all that stuff?
It's going to be over to the right. So we can go.
Okay, so
We have every field in here, all the way down
so
to
you
like
can select districts and then you can
Yep.
scroll to the right and you can see all of the.
all the
Are they
way.
self-explanatory? Because I remember last time the descriptions were somewhat.
We do have on the city website, we have the legend to the Excel spreadsheet that has all of that, all of the field descriptions here. And if there's something that looks a little bit different, we obviously have updated some of the, like this still says 13 to 17, our latest one is 15 to 20. But the fields are themselves, the names are the same.
So the extended data of income and all that, it's what years?
It's 2015 through 2019.
19.
So 15, 19. That is the latest available American Community Survey. We actually were supposed to get an update to the American Community Survey in December, which the census basically said, we can't provide that on time this year, we're sorry. And it still has not come out as of now. When we get the update for the 2016 to 2020 5-year results, we will of course look at whether or not it's appropriate to update it. Obviously having a new set of numbers creates confusion halfway through the process. And so, for example, if we don't get that data until February, we may not be able to update it in time for it to be useful for our process, because a lot of those numbers don't change much year to year. Remember that 80% of the data is going to be the same.
And it's 5 years.
Yeah, it's 5-year data.
Yeah.
One last thing I want to show you
On that tool, can you
about, one last thing I want to show you about Maptitude redistricting before we leave. We do have some measures of compactness and some summary reports here at the top. You can also find unassigned and non-contiguous areas, just to make sure that your map is ready. When you are ready to submit, in the share plan, you want to submit to administrators. Now, I won't let you do this until you have 5 districts. But once you do have the full map done, you want to go to submit, not share, not email, but submit. Sharing the plan basically just gives you a link to your plan that you can send out by email to people who you might want to share your ideas with. Emailing gives you an email, or basically it just emails a shape file, a geographic file of your plan to yourself. That doesn't send it to us. So submit to administrators. That's what actually sends it to us.
One more question before you leave this tool.
Okay.
Can you go back and show us how to edit starting with the existing council map, instead of a new map, but go back to the very first
Sure.
step?
When you're done with your plan, and you don't have to be done, it automatically saves everything you've done. You just go to My Plans, and well, apparently it logs me
It
off,
logs you out.
but that's quick enough. You'll see your plan appears here. You want to create a new plan with the existing districts,
Right.
create that. Let's say, and then basically you can use exactly the same kind of tools we were talking about earlier. You can create your target to be unassigned if you want to just start over from scratch. You can unassign things, or you can choose a district. Let's say I want to add some population to District 1. And you want to take it from District 2. You don't have to set the source as anything, but I always find that it helps me set the source to remember what what we're doing it, where we're doing it to, and where we're doing it from. And then we can use our tools to highlight the area we want to move.
How do you, okay, because I was having trouble clicking on when I going from the existing to without unassigning everything, but to just edit a particular district without having a source.
So target, pick the district you want to move something into.
Out of the
Source. So for target, you have to have a target. You have to have a target. Whether it's unassigned or another district, you can't move anything if you don't have a target. So if our target here is we're going to move something into District 2, whatever it is.
So then the source
is where it's coming from. So if you want to move something out of District 1, you can change your source to District 1, but you still need to have a target.
Can you click show me? I'm sorry.
So our target is District 2. You'll know it's target because it's in green. Your source is District 1. Again, you'll know because it's in red. And then you can, use whichever tool here. I'm going to use the area tool to highlight an area. It's going to select all of the census blocks that are touching that polygon. That's the highlighted area. And then I hit the check mark to move it out of District 1. And I'm not saying anything about any of these areas. I'm just doing it for the purposes of example demo here. And then if I want to swap because I've moved too many people out, I can hit this little arrow, the up and down arrow, and watch this. It swaps District 1 and District 2. When you're tinkering around with the edges of a district, you'll sometimes find that this tool is very helpful to go back and forth as you're fine tuning that border.
So one last thing, if you go all the way back to the beginning, is there how do you select either a 4 or 5 blank to start?
So with Maptitude Online Redistricting, when you create a new plan, you can create either an existing districts, that's 4, or a 5-district blank map.
But I don't,
If you
I don't
want,
see that that's
we
what I
don't
was
have
thinking.
a blank 4-district map. But if you want to create a blank 4-district map, basically you can use the existing districts and create your source or your target
So then you
district
have
to unassigned and change this to all.
unsigned and all.
And then you can draw a circle, for example, and select a large, as much of the city as you can. You can use other tools, of course, to maybe do this more efficiently when you're on your home computer with a mouse. I find this easiest to use with a mouse. Hit the check mark and it unassigns all of those areas. You'll see this big unassigned to let you know that there is an unassigned.
Can you unassign the whole thing though? Was that?
Yes, I just don't have, you have to draw the shape. You have to, and if you're, I don't have a mouse here to do it as efficiently as
That's
possible.
what I couldn't do. I couldn't find how to.
You have to draw it. So you can draw a polygon around the whole city. If I had a mouse, it'd be a little
So
easier.
there's no 4 blank. That's what I was looking for. There's no 4 blank to start.
No. Take it up with a Maptitude Online Redistricting. If you're going to have the same number of districts, their default is you start with the existing one.
Wow, that's what was the pain.
So, and essentially that's how you
So you can't
use
just
the,
click that target unassigned. Oh no, you can't do the source all unassigned. So you have to do the drawing, like you said, the whole city and.
right, because your source, if you start out with the 4-district existing map and your source is unassigned, there isn't a block that's unassigned. It's all been assigned already. You have to unassign everything first. So just zoom out a little bit and then draw this polygon around the city, and then you can make it unassigned.
And the pointer, you can do precinct or block, or
This does one block at a time.
its default is block.
Yes. You can change it. Well, you can't, you don't have any other options here.
Okay, so
Sometimes
it is
like
by
for
law.
counties, you can do it like selecting cities and, but you can only select census blocks.
Block. And is the census data by block available somewhere, or?
So, so it is, it's in the web system. I mean, that's our database is what this is based on. If you want to get a GIS file of the blocks, well, you can see the blocks if you're looking at the map. Because, well, I mean, especially when you're zoomed in a little bit closer. Again, I don't have a mouse here, so I don't have as much control as I would like. But if you're zoomed in, these are the population counts of the different blocks.
But the data within those blocks is what I'm asking if we can see.
Well, okay, yeah, actually, good point. You can hit the I information tool, click on a block, and it will give you this little info. And all the block information is in the table here.
So hit the I, and then you have to select. I'm sorry, because this is not in the instructions. This is not in the help, a lot of this.
I for information, and then you just click on a block or, place on the map. And it has all the different layers that you can get. So it has streets, it has the districts, it has, but it has census block is our first one, and it has all the different fields. So the 74-person block can tell you it has, an estimated 22 households and so on. 10% Latino, 16% Asian, 0% Black, 73% white, all the information's there.
Yeah, where I got stuck was trying to start from scratch for a 4 district. I didn't know how to start editing it without, the source target seemed really cumbersome. I was trying to figure out a way to wipe it out.
The people who make the online tools assume that people are starting with the current district map. And that's the way that they build these on behind the scenes.
But the 5 is a blank slate.
So the 5 is a blank slate, and we had to get that up, and it took them about 3 weeks to actually get it because it was right over Christmas and they had their engineer out. But we do have it available now. So this is essentially how you use the online redistrict or the Maptitude Online redistricting. And so we've gone through Dave's, we've gone through Maptitude Online. We also have, again, the paper-only kits, and we look forward to receiving your maps, however you choose to submit. Remember, you can always submit your map to districts@westminster-ca.gov. And even if you don't have a whole map, even if you just want to produce just a portion of city or part of the city, or if you want to just show your community, or even if you don't want to do a map and you just want to describe your community, we really want to get your feedback however you want to provide it.
What data is available in
So-
Excel to only the high level, not the,
Only the basics.
so the only way to get to analysis of the
The full data is in the Maptitude Online redistricting tool,
What?
which does have its steepest learning curve, but that's sort of the trade-off. Is more data versus, a little bit more difficult or
It'd
complicated.
be nice if you could transfer a map you made from one of the other tools to Maptitude to start. And then.
Yeah, that unfortunately, that kind of functionality does not, yeah. It's more complicated than you think.
Well, I was just spinning out, just
Oh.
trying to find a 4 blank, and I
Yeah.
gave up, so that, okay.
So with that, let me just check on if anybody else on Zoom has any questions. Other than that,
Stop sharing.
Lucy, is there anything else you want to add as we conclude?
Nope.
Oh, we can't hear you. Okay. All right.
Said
Well,
over to stop because she's not
I'm-
gonna move.
I'm sorry, Lucy.
Dude.
Okay, I thought we might just be delayed like we were earlier, but Lucy, I'm sorry, we can't hear you, but I want to thank everybody for coming today or watching here. And I look forward, I hope to see some of you at our future workshops and additional council meetings. And please feel free to reach out again, districts@westminster-ca.gov. If you have any questions about using any of the tools or would, having any trouble reviewing the recording of this. So thank you very much, and I look forward to working with all of you throughout this process. Have a great afternoon, and thank you. Thank you. Okay.